Welcome to the RuleBook. I'm your host, Alex Palmer, and I'm the queen of learning things the hard way so you don't have to. On this podcast, we're going to be talking about the mistakes I made and the lessons I learned to create the rules that I now live by. On each episode, we're going to be discussing a new rule, how it came about, why I created it, and how you can apply it in your own life. So let's get into it. Welcome to episode number 5, putting yourself out there. Putting yourself out there is not for the faint of heart, let me tell you. I struggle with this a lot, whether it's with acting or joining a new class or even uploading content that I'm too nervous to post. Putting yourself out there has consequences. But guess what? So does not putting yourself out there. And for the first time ever, I got to the rule for the episode within the first few sentences. So rule number 5. Putting yourself out there has consequences, but so does not putting yourself out there. So pick your poison. Let me elaborate. When auditioning in person was still a thing, I would sometimes, a lot of the times, miss my auditions. I was so nervous when I would get an audition. Sometimes I could barely breathe, let alone speak, let alone act. And I'd get so nervous to the point where I would just cancel. And I'd come up with every single excuse in the book not to go. I was like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe I didn't prepare enough anyway. Or I'm not going to get this anyway. Or, hey, it's a non-union, non-paying, crappy script. So who gives a shit? So I was doing all these things to self-sabotage myself, to stop myself from showing up and putting myself out there. But guess what? An actress who doesn't go to her auditions is not an actress. And that was something that I really had to grapple with and come to terms with, because if I say that this is something I want to do, but I'm incapable of showing up for myself, then we have a fucking problem. In the beginning, when I was auditioning, I also had very little training. So every audition that I did go to kind of ended up being a public humiliation for me. I would leave feeling really defeated and feeling kind of stupid. And as a perfectionist, I absolutely despise feeling that way. So it was in those moments that I really realized, okay, I need to get myself into a good class and I need a good teacher, because this isn't going to cut it. Because if every time I have to put myself out there, it hurts this bad, I'm never going to be able to sustain this. So even though every audition was a blow to my ego, it was a learning experience. And actors know this, that even when you're really good, you still don't get the part. But if you're not showing up, then you're absolutely guaranteeing that you will not get a part. And obviously, not putting yourself out there is certainly not limited to acting or auditioning. For me, there's been plenty of videos that I didn't post, not even post, let alone create, because I was afraid of people's reaction to them or how they might judge me through that content. It is hard to show up. And that's why so many people just don't. But since we're not alone in this feeling, when you do show up, you're at least miles and miles ahead of everyone who chose not to that day. So there's your silver lining. Even back in my blogging days, I would sometimes write pretty personal things about my life, and sometimes family members would find it and they would forward it to my mother, or they would rat me out to whoever I wrote the blog post about or whatever it was about, and they'd get very upset at me, and I'd end up having a lot of fights with my mom about deleting the things that I posted online. I never actually went and deleted anything, but I did just slowly let the blog completely die. So those fights kind of stopped me from writing. I didn't want my blogs to become arguments. That wasn't the point of them. I really just wanted to express myself in a safe way, because at least a blank page isn't going to tell you to shut the fuck up when you're writing on it. Unlike when you're speaking to someone and they can immediately react to whatever it is that you're saying. When you're writing, you're safe. But yeah, I let that go, because the message that I was getting was, when I show up, people get upset. They don't like it. And I think that's a big part of why some of us stop ourselves. It's because we're afraid of how other people are going to handle us showing up. It wasn't until this podcast that I actually sat down and wrote again. So that's also another reason why I think I was afraid to do this, because I knew that I was going to have to write myself scripts, because I can't just point the camera at myself and speak. If that's you, God bless, but that's not me. So I knew that I was going to have to write each episode, and that was scary for me, because I had to figure out what the line was between overly personal and like how I do want to show up. And it can be really confusing. But It wasn't until I actually started to do this that I was like, oh, okay, this is doable. This is not as big of a deal as I was making it. So that's another thing. I think we make showing up so much scarier in our head than it is, than it has to be. If you just show up and get it over with, you're going to feel so much better. It's really the anticipation of showing up, I think, that also drives us totally bonkers. But every time I do show up, I'm also letting myself know that it's okay. And I'm making it easier for every time after that for myself to show up, because I'm reprogramming myself. And I think Tony Robbins even said this, that a habit doesn't become a habit until you make it part of your identity. So I had to make being someone who shows up online a part of who I am. And slowly but surely it's happening. And the thing is, I actually get embarrassed super easy. And a lot of my content, I shoot it outside. Like, I don't really want to go outside and make a rule about New York City in front of all of New York City. I'm super self-conscious. That is not my vibe, but I have to force myself to do it, even when strangers are coming up to me like, what are you doing? Or giving me looks, or hell, sometimes even filming me. I'm like, oh God, here we go. I don't want that to happen, but I can't let other people stop me from doing the things that I want to do, because that's a terrible reason to not live your life the way you want to live your life. So even though other people are going to get in the way of you showing up, you still have to do it, because you have to choose who you are at the end of the day. Are you someone who's going to let a stranger on the street stop you from making your video? Or are you someone who's just going to smile and move on? I think what helps me now, though, when friends ask like, oh, Alex, aren't you embarrassed to post that on Instagram when most of your Instagram followers are people you know? I'm like, actually, I'm not. Because I'd much rather post the content, see what happens, versus post nothing and absolutely nothing will happen. Because then it's kind of like the acting thing. If you don't go to the audition, you're definitely not getting the part. If you do go, there's like a 1%, like a 0.1% chance something else could happen. Even if you don't get that project, maybe that casting director or whoever it was will remember you for the future. But if you definitely don't show, if your name comes up again, they're absolutely not considering you. So you just have to think about the possibilities. And also, I just didn't want my identity to be someone who disappears. I want to be someone who shows up, even if it's fucking cringe. And let me tell you, sometimes it has been so cringe, you guys, especially when I was starting out in acting. I remember taking an acting workshop with a pretty renowned teacher, and I was very new in my training. I had studied the play Fool for Love for like 6 months, and we were going to be doing a couple scenes from that play for this teacher in this workshop. And most of the audience, well, the whole audience in that workshop was going to be other actors who were also either participating in the workshop or just viewing it for learning purposes. And I remember I got up on that stage, and I was probably 6 months into training with a really good teacher, and I was obviously not ready. But, you know, I had the balls to put myself out there at least. And I chose Fool for Love, which if you are someone who's into theater, you know that that play is a monster of a play and probably not great for beginners. And it certainly was not kind to me. And I got up there and I did it. And the critique I received was, Alex, acting is not playing dress up in your mommy's clothes. Yeah, let that sink in a little bit. Hearing that in front of an audience of other actors who also like audibly gasped when that comment came my way, it was like a knife through my heart. And I'm not being dramatic. It was a knife through my heart, because it felt like the teacher was telling me, well, that I don't take the craft of acting very seriously, nor do I take myself very seriously if I'm a 26-year-old who plays dress up in her mommy's clothes. It's brutal. It was brutal. And I had friends in the audience that day who are also fellow actors, and they were like, oh, Alex, it wasn't that bad. And I was like, yeah, right. I think they were just being kind, because it truly was that bad. And it was very cringy. And yeah, I had put myself out there, and woo, it was painful. And guess what? The way the workshop is set up is you get to perform twice. So that was day one. I had to come back for day two with that note in the back of my head and try to improve on the performance that was already pretty much doomed, because I just did not have the technique to be able to act in this play at that point. And I had to stand there and get even more similar criticism about, the craft of acting and taking myself seriously and pretty much growing up. And even though that was one of the harshest critiques I ever got, it definitely helped me. This teacher's critique kind of reminded me of like when you're in a swimming pool and you're hanging onto the wall because you're too afraid to let go because you're in the water, but you don't want to be in the water. That's what it was like. I felt like this teacher ripped me from the wall, the safety of the wall, and pushed me out into the deep end. Like, here, this is the only way you're going to ever be able to swim. And he wasn't wrong. It's true. Until I let go of the wall, I wasn't swimming. I was sitting in the water doing absolutely nothing. And that's what putting yourself out there. You can't just sit in the pool and hang on to the wall. Sometimes you gotta drown before you swim. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna have to swallow some fucking water before you get it together. And that's what it was for me. I felt like I was truly baptized through fire in this class. And it did eventually lead me to getting my shit together, because no 26-year-old woman wants to hear that she's playing fucking dress up in her mommy's clothes. They just don't. And that's the thing I want to say about showing up. Yeah, we can all say, oh, showing up, you should do it. You have to do it. We all know we should do it. But let's be honest. It hurts. Showing up has consequences, sometimes positive, but sometimes negative. And mostly it can be negative in the beginning, especially when you're trying something new. You're going to fail. You're going to look stupid. You're going to get hurt by what people say about you. And in the beginning with acting, for me, it was mostly a painful experience every time I showed up. I feel like every time I showed up, I got punched in the face. But that just... it made me really good at being punched in the face, metaphorically, but it made me work that much harder when I did show up, because I was like, oh, I know what to do now. And I know how to show up and get the reaction that I want to get. So I ended up going back to that workshop 2 more times. And the last time I did it was right before the pandemic. And I did a different scene from a different play with a different scene partner. And this time the comment that I got was, a positive comment that I'm going to hang on to, was, Alex, you got earned laughs. Maybe that doesn't sound like the most stunning comment, but for me it was, because I felt like, okay, this is a critique about my acting. It's not like a personal critique on my mental state or anything. This is him giving me true feedback about being an actress, and it is positive, because earned laughs, that shows that I worked fucking hard to get those laughs. And trust me, I did. I worked my ass off. So it was really nice to have a new comment to hang on to from that same teacher. And that's the thing about showing up. You're going to get better at it each time you do it. And so I was glad that right before the pandemic, this was the last acting workshop that I ever did. But all this to say, when you grow, it will hurt. And the more you show up, and the more you grow, the less it'll hurt. But I'm super glad that when I was 26, I was told to stop fucking around and playing dress up. And it's because I failed and showed up that I learned. I hope that you will do yourself the same favor. All right, guys, that's episode 5 of the RuleBook. New episodes come out every single Monday. I'm so happy that you're here. Please subscribe to this podcast if you liked it. And don't forget to follow me at Serious Actress on Instagram and TikTok, and of course, YouTube. Bye, guys.